This is Philosophy 3 Aesthetics at Las Positas College. We have taken a look now at some of the trends of modernism with Luce and Corbusier. We have looked at trends of postmodernism, both in general and the deconstructive analysis that was offered by Derrida, as well as by Venturi. What I want to do now is run through a couple of examples of what this kind of postmodern analysis might look like, and we'll use a couple of examples of postmodern architecture to explain these examples. So let's go ahead and start then with this house in Santa Monica, California by the postmodern architect Frank Gehry. Here's a look from the side of the house. Here's another look from the front of the house. With our discussion of postmodernism and our discussion of Derrida in particular, we've seen these are some things that postmodern and deconstructive attempts to interpret and create architecture and art more generally involve. Challenge to traditional binary oppositions, aims to challenge rules and create freedom of expression, break down old tradition but build up meaning in a new way, and rewrite, reinscribe those values for our time and our situation. The postmodernists emphasize that the postmodern or deconstructive project remains forever unfinished, unstable, and reinterpretable. And finally, the deconstructive process is one that happens both for the artist creating deconstructive art as well as for the viewer. So let's think about some of those elements of the deconstructive project relative to postmodern architect Frank Gehry's home in Santa Monica, California. Taking a look at it, can you see any ways in which it could be argued to take traditional opposites and challenge binary opposition, break rules to express freedom, break down tradition but reinscribe meaning and value in new ways, adapt traditional rules to ways that match our modern values, create a sense of instability and interpretability that can happen infinitely, and involve both the viewer and the artist in the process of deconstruction. Well, having looked at these examples with students before, I'll tell you a lot of the things that students frequently see. Let's start with something like the interface or the opposition between the modern and the old, the modern and the traditional. Some aspects of this architectural work definitely have a sense of the modern. You see these large glass structures that we're used to seeing in modern architecture, although these glass structures are different in that they lack that geometric simplicity, that box-like structure we are used to associating with modernism. Some parts of it also look very traditional. Students oftentimes see something like a barn-like shape in the shape of the roof here, and the wood siding that you find on the back of the house here. Let's talk about some binary opposites such as beautiful and ugly, wealthy and poor, decorative versus functional. You can see something like this corrugated siding, oftentimes associated with very impoverished communities, or this chain link fence that's here, oftentimes associated, like the corrugated steel, with rundown environments with an entirely utilitarian purpose because of its inexpensive way to keep people out or to keep people in. And these utilitarian elements are being repurposed for sort of decorative purpose, challenging that opposition between what counts as decorative and what counts as functional, what counts as what would be used by a rising architect versus what would be used in an impoverished environment. And that idea of beauty versus functional being challenged as well. We can also see ways in which this building seems to have an infinite amount of interpretations, the way in which the building itself seems unfinished, from this unfinished door to these unfinished wooden steps. Clearly these wooden steps are designed to integrate into these cast concrete steps. So they're not an accident, and they're probably not designed to be very temporary, but that sense of the temporary, that sense of the artist's work as something that's constantly being built, is kind of built into the structure itself. Even the chain link fence gives it that sense of a temporariness or a temporary structure, something designed to hold place just long enough, let's say, for the building itself to be built, but it's actually become integrated into, and it remained part of Gehry's house for quite some time. I've always thought that this retaining wall itself looks a little bit like a foundation, but turns out it's not a foundation at all. It's just a retaining wall, which seems to suggest that anti-foundationalism that postmodernism invites. Distinctions between what counts as inside and outside are also challenged here. We're used to seeing corrugated steel as something like a fence, but what looks like it might be outside of the house, and in fact at one point was outside of the house, has now become this interior space, which is actually quite beautiful and useful from the inside. Now, if we were to take Derrida's expectations seriously here and ask what kind of values are being reinscribed, we might hazard some guesses or some interpretations that said Derrida is trying to challenge ways in which we include and exclude people as beautiful. We include and exclude materials as attractive. We include and exclude what counts as urban renewal versus urban blight, what counts as functional and useful and valuable. Gehry has taken it all and reinterpreting it, reinscribing those values into what turns out to be a very functional home. In fact, if we take this space that's right here and then we take a look inside of it, we'll see this beautiful and utilitarian kitchen space. You can really see the way in which what appears from the outside, as though it might be a less than aesthetic object, becomes, even with a modernist eye, if you can handle the irregular shapes and contours and colors, it becomes an obviously beautiful space at the same time that it is a utilitarian kitchen. Let's take a look at one more bit of postmodern home architecture. This is the home that Robert Venturi, who wrote Learning from Las Vegas, made for his mother. You can see these postmodern elements here. You can see the lack of symmetry in the windows that are breaking up, as Corbusier would put it. They're breaking up those geometric forms. You can see the ways in which the geometric forms themselves are uneven and unstable and don't give that sense of stability and symmetry to the object. You can see ways in which purely decorative things like this apparent arch, which isn't really an arch at all, serve no purpose at all, but just pure decoration. You can see this sort of very traditional home structure with the sloping roof, and at the same time it's accented with this rather dramatic break as the roof itself slopes to its peak, both embracing and denying this traditional structure that even a child might draw. Oftentimes when students look at this, they see what might be as if it was a sort of a barn type of shape that was sunk into the ground, with this very large door opening also in some ways reminiscent of what might suggest a barn in the rural landscape. Oftentimes students see in this formation here something reminiscent of what you might see at the top of a church, signifying a place of worship. And it does seem to suggest that element of the sort of country landscape, the country church. At the same time it's portrayed, it's also deconstructed, so it's suggested, just like the barn, and deconstructed, and all put together into a shape that works effectively as a house for Robert Venturi's mother. You see other elements of decentering here, the landscape versus the entryway. Again, what counts as inside versus outside is somewhat challenged, as there's this sort of balcony or open space here in what seems to be the house, and the open space here as well, which also serves as a functional space if you need to get away from the rain. From the back, you can also see how a lot of these decorative elements are also functional for letting in light and creating beautiful interior space, just like in Frank Gehry's home. And we definitely do see the ways in which the interior space of this home is beautiful. At the same time, these unusual shapes for the Venturi home are even more playful. If you see these stairs, they actually start out narrow and then widen. There's a little snub at functionality here with this hand railing for the stairwell, which extends to the point where it could probably hit you in the shins if you weren't careful. Venturi is all about using space for functionality and retaining that functionality, but retaining the sense of playfulness and sort of advertising the anti-modernism of this house at the same time that he creates useful space with playful ways to arrange the elements of the house that are still used for function. Venturi talks about the ways in which his mother was free-thinking and iconoclastic, and relating back to tradition, also liked to break with traditional expectations. And this house, if we can take Venturi at his word, could go a long way to expressing some of those values of his mother at the same time that it expresses the values of Venturi, takes traditional elements, rewrites them in a way that works for his mother. His mother, Venturi says, didn't really even mind all the visitors that started coming by, because he liked to engage them in discussions about the house and in discussions about his son, the famous architect. So hopefully these two examples are sufficient to show ways in which we can both look at art itself and the process of art creation as one of respecting history, taking history seriously, but being willing to reorganize things in a way that's meaningful, special, and valuable relative to ourself and our expression of our values, as well as ways in which culture changes over time. The great art, as always unfinished and always interpretable, will be constantly inspiring in us that desire to reinterpret just as much as when we create it.